Welcome to all the panelists for today, Noel, Saquon, Jean. It's an immense pleasure to be hosting this panel discussing about what the future lies for 2025 in the space we all love, which is HR and people. Um, and it is also very unique that the way we've set this panel, we have someone who's a thought leader in the advisory space. We have someone who's working very closely in the way technology is disrupting almost each and every walk of our life. And then we have a fellow practitioner in Jean who's making sense of all of that and taking her organization ahead by leaps and bounds. So, really excited to be hosting this panel. And, you know, 2025 started off with, I would want to call it's the perfect opportunity for organizations today. Um, it started off with opportunities arising from great technological advancements which happened. It started off with um, a lot of shifts that we are seeing in the way we think of employment today. It started off with governments realizing the value of reskilling and repurposing jobs, which was also evident in the Singapore budget, which just got announced. So it creates the right opportunity for organizations to thrive. And, without me talking a lot, I'll just open up the floor to Noel. Noel, where do you see us heading in 2025 and beyond? What are some of the big shifts that we're seeing organizations, particularly if we think of the CEOs, the CHROs, what's keeping them up at night? And that'll be a great way to kick off the panel straight off.
Thank you, Vikram. Just thank you, Darian Vox, as well, for having us here. I think there are three particular issues. One is that you rightly point out, Vikram, that it's the CEO and the CHRO. The second being, what's the state of the AI industry? All things remaining the same. Has it improved? What are the trends there? And then also the state of AI use within organizations, right? So these are the three broad areas, and I'll just touch briefly so we can have an understanding, because not all things are the same when you talk about AI. So we recently launched, and this is PwC, our 28th CEO survey. We collect end of last year, and then we published it recently this year. And this is the 28th year that we're doing it. And the results are in. And if you look at the data, it's on our website. So you just put in PwC 28 CEO, you can find the data. And the data shows that CEOs, 40% of them, out of the survey group of 4,700 around the world, 40% of them lose sleep every night because they believe that their business are going to go bust. Primarily because technology, investment, transformation, all of that good stuff, and how people, interact with that, etc. And are their organizations ready? And especially in the last 3 years till this year, significantly the use of AI, right? How that, and so they worry about these things, and so CEOs and CHROs per se uh, are concerned about this. How is it going to impact their businesses? And if you look at Forbes, or Fortune 500 companies, these guys are saying they don't last more than 10 years. These public
Mhm.
listed companies, right? It'll fall off the map. And so these CEOs, this 40% agree. And these are some of the largest companies in the world, right? So that's one. The second is the state of AI in industry, right? And this invention is, at least in the last 3.5 years, when it first appeared with OpenAI and, furiously, right, going forward. But if you think about the industry, it's actually in four pieces. First is the hardware. Second, the software. The third is your databases that you're talking about. And then the fourth is feedback, right? How good is the product or the AI tool or chatbot, whatever you build, or AI agents that you build, good, and how customers interact with them. So these are the four areas. With hardware, NVIDIA used to lead that, And I say used to because it used to be a hardware play in terms of AI because they've been leading that, the H100 chips, semiconductor chips, right? If you look at hardware investment in the US in the last, say, 4 years since 21, that investment has grown by 42% year on year, right? And last year alone, you spend, the spend in the US alone to build these these places that build semiconductors range around 32, 33 billion, right? And people say, wow, that's a lot of money. Actually, it's not. It's just TSMC building one plant. So all of that figure, 90% of it was TSMC. They're building 3 plants there. I happened to visit the first one, and it's amazingly huge, right? A lot of Taiwanese running around because they didn't have the talent in the US. So this is the issue with hardware, right? It's one thing to build the massive plants, to build the smallest, most, and then in chip industry, as you all know, it's different for different. You're talking about high-end chips, versus, low-end memory chips that you unfortunately or fortunately use in, cell phones, etc. So there are different things to different people. But a lot of these high-end chips are still being built in Taiwan, right? So hardware still leads. But this year, and the next one is software, with DeepSeek coming out, and we know about DeepSeek, right? It's thanked a lot of the listed companies fine rating. And so when you think about DeepSeek is the quintessential product of disruptive innovation, right? So in software, disruptive innovation is the key. And so if you read Clayton Christensen's book on that, you'll know that that's at play. And these products that come out when they challenge the hegemons, when they challenge the leaders, they're not the best, right? But that's the first off firing, right? We are going to get better over time, and guess what? We'll catch up, right? So when you think about software, and there are actually 2 companies here in software, Microsoft and yourselves, Darwinbox, and you guys are the leaders in your space. And then the next one, when you think about the data sets, right? The data sets are amazingly complex, more and more, bigger and bigger, and everyone is adding to it, and especially HR now. And and then there's not just like large language models, there's small language models, making its presence felt. And we're going into inferencing now. So that's wonderful. And then you think about feedback, and certain markets perform better in feedback in terms of customer feedback than others. China, for example, is on the top, right? China, when you use something in China, you get tremendous feedback from the users, and then people can then adjust. And that's the second point. The third point is the state of AI in companies, right? And those of us who work in companies know that companies also struggle with AI. You have what I call the 4 A's, right? Are you using AI as an assistant, right? Just helping, but you're doing majority of that work, right? And 15 to 30% improvement, that's what you get. Or the second level, as you get more into AI, you get into augmentation, and up to 50% improvement. This is where most companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, all these guys, they're saying that's where we are right now. Most of the activity in AI is in augmentation. The third phase, you're going into automation of entire workflows, right? So, and then the fourth phase is really autonomy. So what's the difference between automation and autonomy? So if you think about a self-driving car, right? If you own a Tesla or one of these, they have these features. And when you switch it on, it can drive on its own. But that's very different than when you meet a catastrophe or hazard, road hazard. Can the car veer itself out of the hazard? And that's autonomy. So when you think about the two, when you go into automation, you have 100, 200% improvement. And when you have autonomy, you're going up to 300%. So depending on where you are in your organization, and especially HR in this case, where are you in different processes, right? And you want to think of your processes in those 4 terms. And it's important to see it that way. So this disruption in technology will continue, and transformation will continue, and I think the solution, there is a solution, is to build a systemic HR organization where everything and anything is connected, right? And that's the short intro. Thank you.
It's very enlightening, Noel. I love the fact that organizations today realize that they're just moments away from disruption. We've seen that happen very recently with organizations. So there was a bit of a scare, and the stocks of a certain organization just fell massively. We all saw that, and that sent shivers down all the stock markets. So there is interconnectedness. And the other point which you made was, really very pertinent, that with technological changes happening faster and faster, it really puts spotlight on one function which gets people ready for these changes and to adopt these changes, right? I'll move to Saquon. Saquon, your organization is in the eye of the storm, driving most of these disruptive changes. And if you could just double click on how do you see organizations today moving forward with regards to tech adoption, as well as particularly when it comes to topics like AI, where are organizations today? What are they struggling with? It'd be great to hear your thoughts over there.
Thank you, Vikrant. Want to start by thanking Vikrant and Darwinbox for this opportunity to come in and have a conversation with industry experts. So I'm honored to be part of this panel. So thank you for that. I think I agree with a lot of the points Noel mentioned. I think one of the points that he mentioned was a lot of the executive CEOs and so forth lose sleep at night because of the AI adoption and change, and I think that's very true. I think the leaders are in a very difficult situation because they cannot ignore the technology shift that's occurring right now with AI, because ignoring it will mean that they're going to disappear, as Noel mentioned. But adoption is not easy as well. A lot of people are looking, learning, trying to adopt, but that transition is very difficult. Fortunately, when we look at technology shifts, in the past, this was not the first one. We had client server really early, about 30 years ago, disruption there, and then internet. When internet came in, that was a huge technical shift as well. And then smartphones was another one. And now we're going, and then cloud adoption. Now we're going through AI. And although the technical and the technology side of things are changing and things are getting faster and faster, I think some of the fundamentals of transformation are not changing. It's the same. I think it's about having the right strategy to start with. So if you're thinking about adopting AI in your company, you really need to start by building that strategy, AI strategy for your company. That's the first one. And I'll come back to that. But second point that's also really, really important is this transition has to be led at the top, led by the CEO, CXO level executives, because it's organizational, company-wide change. It can't be pockets of changes that won't have the impact or the ROI that you want. So it has to be led from the top, led, sponsored, and supported from the top. But it needs to be balanced with bottoms-up approach in terms of what are the use cases, what are the business outcomes that need to be resolved, because you don't want to just adopt AI for the sake of adopting the latest technology. You want to make sure that it's based around your business needs, the outcomes, business outcomes that you want, business challenges that you want to solve. And that needs to be built into that AI strategy that I mentioned before. So I think we've been through that, those changes before, so those fundamentals in terms of transformation doesn't change. But understanding the technology and adding it to those transformation fundamentals will be really important. Some of I think the other thing that's different about AI compared to the past is the speed of change. I think, when ChatGPT first came out, it was one of the first fastest adopted applications in history. I think they had a million or 10 million users in like matter of months or something like that, right? So, and that's getting faster and faster. And within AI, it's also the changes are occurring faster and faster as well. Right now, it's predominantly more around assistants, co-pilot, and so forth that helps workers in different roles to do their job better. But as Noel mentioned, it's a limited increase in productivity. But more and more, we're seeing things like AI agents or agentic AI coming through, and that's going to be the trend that we're going to see in the next few years, and it's going to be really, really quick. And that's going to move from just being an assistant or an advisor to really doing that role of many of the roles that we see today. And that's where I think HR, it's an opportunity for HR leaders to really lean in and stay ahead of the technology, because it's an opportunity for HR leaders to become much, much more strategic in the future of the organization you're in. So I'll stop there and so that others can have a chance to talk as well. But those are some of the things that we're seeing from my perspective and my company's perspective.
Oh, that's fantastic to hear. 2 points I really loved was, when you spoke about the fact that fundamentals haven't changed. That's a conversation I want to pick up with Gene. And the second, there's a beautiful quote one of our attendees put up in the chat, that this will be the last group of CEOs who will exclusively manage humans, right? You also touched upon the role that agentic will play. Noel spoke about how there is a path to autonomy. Mixed opinions on autonomy. But that's the pace at which things are changing. I'll turn over to Gene. Gene, I've been wanting to come to you. Gene, if one was to put yourself, if one was to put themselves in your shoes, the fundamentals for you haven't changed, right? You're still trying to attract the best talent that you have in the region globally. You're trying to develop them. You're trying to retain them. You're trying to offer them a great path, right? So again, linking to what Saquon said, the fundamentals haven't changed. What has changed in your role, and how do you see this only moving faster and faster going forward as you take a look forward to 2025?
Thanks, Vikram. And first of all, good morning to everyone. Thank you to Darwinbox for inviting me to the panel discussion today. I think great minds here. Shout out to the audience. I think the people joining, you go to different webinars, and sometimes you just get folks that are really engaged and saying hi and, engage. So, as I share my thoughts, if you want to share anything of your personal experience, please feel free to do so. I think as HR, we're in this together. I'm going to share how I personally feel and maybe some of my emotions. If you do want to share how you feel, let us know. Right. So so Vikram, if I could just quickly touch on what Saquon and Noel talked about. I particularly enjoyed what Noel mentioned about assist, augment, automation, and autonomy. It now gives me a framework of the different parts of HR where I am. All right. And haven't had that kind of thinking. And when Saquon talked about strategy, right, this also kind of helps me have a framework to think through my strategy as well, and the roadmap. And I think Saquon brought up a really important point, and that is about the balance between top down and bottoms up, which I think is incredibly important, which I also share in terms of my observation. But in terms of fundamentals and what I've observed that's changing, I will say, confession, I actually feel really excited about AI, but I also feel a lot of anxiety. All right, I don't know if the audience will feel the same. Excited, but a little bit worried. But I'll start with an observation. So all of us over here, a lot of you are HR professionals. You have gone through digital transformation, yes? So back in, not too long ago, during our digital transformation journey, we had some time to carefully, you can develop policies, you can develop the programs, and it's kind of rolled out in an incremental way. You have time. Well, AI isn't really giving us that luxury. AI is, to me, is not waiting for my careful plans. It's already here. And I was reading on a McKinsey report, it says that more than 40% of employees are already using generative AI in their work. Many of these younger employees probably using it more than I do. In fact, just yesterday, I was talking to my team about ChatGPT, and I was mind blown to find out how they have been using it at work. So this is amazing. So we need to surf the wave. We can't control it, I guess, like Sekon mentioned, it's here. All right, and yes, that's both scary, but also exciting. And I'll tell you what's exciting for me. So Noel, you mentioned the fundamentals have not changed, but I think AI is going to change how HR works. Why? Because if, for example, Gartner predicted that AI will perhaps eliminate 65% or more of our admin tasks. So then if you reduce the admin work, then what is the core for HR becomes what I've always wanted to do. I want to focus on our people. I want to focus on building real culture, driving real change. So I'm no longer, spending half of my time looking at the process and being a process manager. So I want to be an interpreter. I want to be an enabler, not just an administrator. So I'm super excited about that part. Now, so like I said, ups and downs. The excitement comes with kind of fear. I feel like AI is keeping me on my toes because it's like a chess game that's already happening. So we're playing catch up in HR. So let me share something that I've already shared with panelists before. Just recently, as we're implementing AI recruitment tool, right? We saw that candidates are starting to use AI to optimize their CVs. And so there is a higher selection of them. So it almost feels like there are people who also know how to bid the AI system. So it's almost like a technological arms race that I never saw coming. So sometimes I'll go like, okay, just when I move this piece, I have 3 other things that I think I need to catch up with. So the challenge, we barely have time to adapt, but by the time you figure out one thing, the challenges pop up. But I think AI is teaching me and a lot of HR teams to be agile, to be experimental, and actually to be more humble, to be honest. And I'll just touch on one last point, which is, I think I'm facing a lot of questions that I've never encountered before in HR. So for example, when AI helps someone, a manager, writes a performance review, who is the author? Where is the thought coming from? If it's refined, how close is that to what the manager thinks? When AI suggests career moves in performance talent management, how do we make sure that it's not biased? It's the same for recruitment. How do I make sure that there is no bias in selecting maybe people who are better at beating the AI system? So these are kind of novel boundaries that we need to draw in real time. I think transparency, data privacy, and human oversight will always be important. Again, back to you, Vikran, on the fundamentals of the principles that we have will never change. And more importantly, as Sekon mentioned, as we are trying to rush to adopt AI, the most important human question is, what is the people problem that you're trying to solve? It's not about building the most tools. It's about what is it that you're really trying to meet the needs of.
No, that's beautifully put, Jean. I like the candor. It takes a lot for someone to say that we're excited and scared at the same time. Really appreciate the candor over there. The other thing which you touched upon 2 very pertinent points, right? It's about people at the end of the day. And then the second point you spoke about was really around where are the lines that need to be drawn? Will lines get blurry as we move forward? And how do we protect the fact that, when it comes to data privacy, when it comes to, transparency and trust on the recommendations coming out of any agentic tool that we use, How do we really make sure that, you know, all these boundaries are respected, right? So two very great points which you've brought up. I want to tackle the people issue first, and then also move on to the realm of responsible, ethical AI. I'll move to Noel. Noel, with all these changes happening, and I was doing a recap of the Singapore budget. I think a fantastic budget, and there is such a hidden message over there that the jobs which we have today will not be the jobs of tomorrow. For a government to go out there and talk so much about skilling, I think it's absolutely fabulous. Um, where are organizations today? So if you interact with a lot of CEOs, CHROs, how are they getting ready to get people ready for this change? At the end of the day, yes, in the future, we may have a workforce which is part people, part agentic. Agents will need to be taught. People will need to be taught. How are organizations getting ready for this?
So it's really important to know, I mean, if you think about history, the the craftsman, for example, if you go into like 200 years ago, if you walked into a village anywhere in the world, the most important craftsman, for example, is the carpenter. The carpenter, before you get married, you need to go to the carpenter and say, can you help me build the house, the frame? Because there was no non-brick houses. You had wooden houses, right? And you need a wooden frame for the door, the wooden frame for the window, and then you need furniture. So if you went to, you show up in Europe somewhere in the Middle Ages, the carpenter is really important. Before you got married, it's just like in Singapore, right? Before you get married, you go get your HDB flat. but in those days, the carpenter, right? And the carpenter decides in his schedule, right? And because he's the human expert. So today, with agentic AI, the rise of agentic AI or agents, AI agents, all the more the human expert is very important. And the problem moving forward for most organizations is you have the experts today. Jean herself is the expert in her CHRO frame, but who after her and who after that, and that succession, how do you build these experts? So you had the non-AI world where you lived in, you learn everything from HR administration, operations, etc., all the hard way. And then you grew up in the firm, you have all this, knowledge that you've gathered over time. And now suddenly AI comes out and say, we're the agent, right? And you can handle it because now you recreate yourself and restore new knowledge. And the new knowledge is really how, and Jean spent a lot of time saying that, which is how do I interact with this new development, this disruptive innovation called AI? How do I help my teams interact with it? And how do I help my peers, my CEO, etc., to the C-suite to kind of interact with that, right? So, but she can do that because she's an expert. She's the human expert. How do you build more genes without now that environment, right, as it were, that she grew up in? And so that's the big question. How do you build more human experts and now having to do it differently? Because now the agents would do, some may say 25, 35% of the work, but eventually up to 60%, as Gartner says. And then, great, for an expert, you're taking my admin away. I love it, right? But can you imagine the younger ones who are growing up? The assumptions that, but why did you guys do this? And why did, they don't. So in, professional services firms are facing this, right? All of us, right? How do you build the younger ones to grow up to become partners like myself if you don't put them through the grind? So I remembered my first 2 years, unfortunately, not so good years in professional services. I started with photocopying and binding reports. Every single report or presentation that went out, the partner would get me to do it. And that was all I did for the first 2 years. And then eventually I asked this partner, why did you make me do this, right? And he said, because you have a view of all interactions that we have with all of our customers for the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Do you enjoy it? And I went, yes, I know how to build them. So, you become expert PowerPoint guy. But But as a result, you got that, intrinsic knowledge of how the firm thinks, etc., and you see all that workflow, and then you have all these conversations with the partners, how to, beautify their slides, right? All of that tutorship, that mentorship was important to build Noel,
Mhm.
right? So how do you now recreate that and to get that human expert? So that's I think the most important thing. Outside of that, and so you have to re-engineer that, right? So
Mm.
the 4 A's: assistance, augmentation, automation, and then autonomy. Those 4 phases are not also equal, right? Especially in the first 2 phases, the agents are beginning to appear, but in the next 2, you really need to work with the agents, right? And all of this work is actually got to hand in hand with what the Singapore government calls job redesign. And that's why the budget is there. All these 4 phases are job redesign. You're redesigning work and how work is done between machine and human in all 4 phases. And if you keep your eye on that as HR, you're fine, right? But behind that, you're also re-engineering the way the entire organization, right? Josh Bersin came out with a survey. He calls it the systemic organization. And his survey showed that only 11% of all organizations in the world are systemic. But the minute you become systemic, you're 70, 80% more productive than the other guy.
Mm.
That's amazing productivity, right? If you ask any CHRO, and it's driven by HR, this systemic organization.
Wow. Systemic we'll come to, but I think the way you coined it on what we need to get ready for, and the importance of, I think I'm also following the chat. There are so many comments coming in on the opportunity to humanize, right? And whenever I hear that word humanize, I think, aren't we humanizing enough? Or aren't we, will it give us more time to connect with people? So that's the dichotomy, right? With all of these shifts coming in, it's an opportunity for us to humanize. But what does humanize mean, right? So here's my take on that, right? I know I'm supposed to moderate, but I'll just throw something out there for the panelists to react also. So when it comes to humanizing work or humanizing the work culture or an organization per se, we did a research last year where we looked at what are the tenets of employees who feel that their organization is human, right? And there were 4 very important themes which came out, right? And it almost goes like in a sequence, right? The first and foremost is I need to feel supported, which means the organization gives me the tools which make me far more productive. It gives me access to my data, to my talent data, so that I can see where I am, where do I need to be, and where is my team, right? So it starts with support. Then it moves to the layer of trust, where organization policies are fair, they're equitable, and they're applied consistently across the organization with a sense of certain amount of tailoring which may happen to the context of the employee. So that really brings in the right amount of trust. That moves to the moment all of this is happening well, you move to a stage of transparency where people know that if a certain decision's been made, it's been made very well. And last but not the least, if you've done all of these 3, you reach to a stage where you're truly being empathetic to your employees, right? So just throwing it out there because I saw a lot of questions which were coming in around humanizing. So that's the journey we all need to take when it comes to humanizing the organization. And I think where these shifts in technology are taking us, Pragya and Vanya are behind the scenes. They're running the show. They'll put up what Darwinbox is doing with our own native LLM. We were one of the industry pioneers to come up with our own LLM, being one of the first, and now we are pushing the limits on when it comes to how generative AI will be used not only as features but across the platform. Pragya will put that on the chat in a while. The advantage of technology shifts these days is you can straight away move to empathy, because the first three are given, right? For support, you have all sorts of tools available, and generative AI has been a massive game changer. For the first time, you don't need to code. You're writing it and you get feedback, you can interact. Policies, understanding them, how they are applied, and then questions around how it's been run. All of these get addressed. So it takes away that journey of moving from support, trust, transparency, and we can straight away move to empathy. Just throwing it out there for the attendees. I do want to pick up on one very important aspect, Sequan. I'll come to you for that. Gene brought it up. Where are the lines between responsible AI and the not so responsible AI, right? I don't have another word. Everyone talks about responsible AI. I'll just throw a joke over here, right? We all know that the opposite of large is small, but what's the opposite of medium, right? So so that's what I feel with responsible AI. There is responsible AI and everyone is on that path, but there isn't. What's the opposite of responsible AI, and how are organizations addressing that?
That's a really good question, and it's a very important question. It's something that we need to really think a lot about what that is and how it's set up and how it's applied. I think it's almost as important as the technology transition itself. But the challenge right now is that because technology is moving so fast, so quickly, even the leaders of technology are worried about the responsible part of it, because you got to continue to innovate, because in this world, of course, I think 90%, 95% of the people are good people, but then there's also the non-good people that are also developing, and they're going to be using the technology to try to take advantage, right? So that's one, and then inadvertently we also have things like biases that we may have that we need to put in as well, different perspectives that we may have, so that it's not leaning towards one view or the other. It's not discriminating and so forth. So it's a very complex issue, but I think it's something that we all need to be working on together. And that's why I think from Microsoft's standpoint, we are leaning in heavily in terms of what does responsible AI mean. We're working with the governments, working internally as well. But I think it's going to be up to all the leaders to really think about that and build that together, and work, especially with working with the public sector and the governments, so that we can set what does it mean? How do we make sure that the technology, the fantastic technology that we're developing continues to stay productive, and it enhances human life and humanizes, as you mentioned, rather than bring pain or angst to everyone. So I think that's the balance that we're going to need to make, but we need to move really, really quickly, because technology is moving too quickly.
Yeah, and a point over there, Sequan, it's been what, it's not even coming close to a year that we were introduced to generative AI.
Yeah.
And the world is calling for collective action, and there are AI summits happening. It just reinforces the point which you just made, that we've got to work very closely with governments, with organizations, to make sure that from an AI standpoint, it's bias free, data is secure, because organizations will trust, and will, in that moment of trust, they will also create a lot more data, as they interact with these tools. It becomes very important over there. Gene,
If I can just add one more point before
yes.
you move on, as we move into that agentic AI that we've mentioned a few times, that's going to become even more important because there's going to be times when humans are not making the decisions. That's when the agentic AI is in place. That agentic AI, the main difference is that they're going to be able to analyze, observe, analyze, and then make decisions and then take action as well, right? So that's where it's going to become very, very important to have a right framework of responsible AI.
So Gene, circling back, you brought this very pertinent point up that, there are biases which come in. You tend to like certain CVs more than the others because people are trying to game the tool. What Saquon mentioned actually dovetails into that, right? That as we are starting to use these tools, um, I can put it very simplistically, right? You ask ChatGPT hello, or that same question two times, you'll get a different answer. But the right tools which are built uh, for organizational use, a good test is you ask them that one question and you'll get the same answer, right? Regardless of which location are you asking that question from, because the idea is that it's looking at your data, your policy, what applies to you, and then giving you the appropriate response. Coming to you, Gene, agentic, it's a word we never knew of till a quarter back, and now it's just taken everyone by storm. Everyone seems to be focusing on how they will be using agentic tools um, in the near future. Um, any thoughts that you have on how will agentic help your organization or the HR fraternity?
Well, I would say actually I have so many thoughts on that. I think the possibilities are endless. And I go back to what you mentioned, and I'm discovering new things actually every single day. We talked about humanizing. I think I just kind of want to also have a bit of a disclaimer out there. I don't talk about AI as the opposite of humanizing. I think that would be presumptuous of me to put AI as an antithesis of humanizing. I think AI can help us humanize in two ways. One, I think Lena talked about it, right? Frees up time, allows for meaningful human interactions. But I'm also starting to realize there are a lot of different tools that allow for, say for instance, I just did a demo last week where, where they look at employee listening. They were able to bring together, so the how it works is that it creates a focus group discussion through AI, does random matching, gets a few people connected in the same breakout room, share thoughts on a topic, and AI basically summarizes and creates insights and creates recommendations on some of the things that are that the people actually talk about. And that human interaction creates great data, creates great recommendations. And I think where HR or leaders come in is AI can give you the data, but why the data is important, why the data is meaningful, it's for us to decide. Right? So I don't know how to answer your question, Vikram, as of today, because like I said, I'm learning new things every day. Every day I realize, well, okay, I am way behind. And that's one of the main things I wanted to share earlier, that I almost always feel like I'm playing a catch-up game. It's a humbling experience. It's sometimes anxiety provoking, but actually mostly exciting. And I think as HR, we need to prep ourselves to be a lot more agile. I think that really is key. When we are stuck in perfection, when we're stuck in, I got to do this thing right, then I think we will be far behind. And I think I really want to go back to Saquon's point on, ensuring clear frameworks. Being very, very, you need to always go back to first principles, or always go back to clear principles on, for example, when we were talking about AI earlier, we were talking about transparency in AI use, strict data privacy, human oversight. Your organizations needs to have a very clear idea what your AI strategy is, what your framework is, then you don't lose track because the
Mm.
possibilities are endless. So how do you, in a shiny world of many things happening, anchor yourself? Go back to those discussions with top leadership.
Fantastic. Really helps. And again, the fact that you're talking about the way that, this is a journey which will evolve, and we need to be ready. We need to be ready to embrace changes which will come through, is fantastic. And I think that is a very important mindset, where one of the biggest trends for 2025 will be, how are we embracing change? It sounds like a cliche that, it's there in the Darwin Box name, right? One of the reasons why we are called Darwin Box is because of that inspiration, that, it will be the survival of people who are able to adapt to the change. And it's just thrown a spotlight on that one very important fact. I do want to take in some questions. There are some great questions which have come from our attendees. We do have 10 minutes on the panel, so if there are more questions, please keep them coming in. Wherever I can see the name of the person who's asked the question, I will thank you for asking the question and then ask the question. Luigi, this one's from you. As we've moved towards adopting new technology, it could be AI, it could not be AI. What are Luigi is asking, what are the kind of resistance patches which we get, and how do we overcome that, right? So I'll again go to Noel there, because I'm sure he would be in a lot of conversations where there is resistance to change. So Noel, how are you advising organizations to overcome that barrier?
So I think in the first place, you need to make sure your C-suite is on board. So a year ago, and this is Microsoft, right? Satya Nadella, a year ago, he said, I'm a 2-year-old CEO of a startup, AI startup. And if you know Satya, he's been there for since 1996. So how could he be a 2-year-old new CEO? He said that publicly several times, right? You go search YouTube, you'll find him. And the reason is because exactly what Say Kwon was saying, that the company has gone through all these iterations, as and he was the leader of the cloud movement within Microsoft, pushing for that. And then eventually he became CEO, right? I had the privilege of working with him. And one of the things that came out of it was, he says, you know what, I need to embrace this. I and my senior team need to embrace it. So he started writing a book in 2018. He came out with a book, and everybody laughed at him. New CEO, what book is he writing? He thinks what? It's an author. But what he did, and then one of the things he made his, leadership team read, right, was a book that was talking about, growth mindset. And everybody again said, what is this growth mindset business, right? And then they came out, and then, together with him, the teams that worked with him came out with this model, coach, and care, and which is now the model that, modeling, because leadership behavior, you have to model that, right? So he starts every meeting, right? Every single meeting till today, actually, especially with his leadership team, and with, N-1, N-2, he always starts with the values of the company. Why we exist, why we are doing what we are doing, and as an AI company, right? And he keeps reiterating that. He keeps talking about how change takes place. When you think about how the premises, the campuses in Microsoft are redesigned, he again comes out and say, how do we do that? So from him, he's driving that change, and he is the key change leader, right? So I'm just using him because he's so public, and because there's so much information about him, right? So, but amazingly, as a result, when HR gets into the fold, it's not HR that's pushing this change. It's the leadership of the firm. It's the voice of the firm behind this, right? And so suddenly, he, working with him, he said, people are going to fall out, people are going to leave, etc., etc. Guess what? 99% of the people want this. So, right, they want to be with the game if the leadership is with this. They don't want to be misaligned. People want to be aligned with their leaders, especially if it's the right thing, right? So I think one of the key strategies is this mindset shift that will lead to behavior shift. So if you think about model coach care, model means, and in leadership theory, or practice, you have two basic schools of thought. One is I lead from who I am, what's left in, my psychometrics, my who I am. And the other is where I lack, where there are behaviors that are not built into me, where I don't naturally have, and they are good behaviors for the organization. I want to model them. So the two are true. It used to be one or the other, but now you have to do both. You have to lead from who you are, but you also have to embrace that change, that those behaviors that are good for your organization, and you have to embrace them. And you as the CEO, you as the C-suite, you have to embrace it. And then you speak with it, So for example, at the end of every meeting, Satya would say to his leadership team, what have we done, right? As in, what has the C-suite done to help our lowest paid associates to serve our highest paying customers, so that their unmet and unarticulated needs are met?
Fantastic.
That is amazing, right? Right. So how do you do that, right? And he keeps doing that. And these people are like, oh, initially when he first did that, they're like, can we take this guy seriously? He's a philosopher, but eventually they get it. They get it because guess what? It's an unmet, unarticulated need. And today when he says that, and I use that as well, I quote him a lot in that, I get standing ovations with my clients when I say that. We can help you meet your unmet and unarticulated, because it's unmet and I don't have the language for it. And with AI change, that's what it is. You're meeting your unmet and because you don't know, and Jean alluded to it. You don't know what you don't know. So how are you going to say it? So as you partner people, that discourse, that rich discourse that only humans can do, and that's why soft skills are so important, that only humans can do, that, appreciative inquiry that has to happen, right? Now, that comes out, and then you get the unmet and unarticulated needs met.
Fantastic. One final question before we move to closing remarks. This one came from Lena. Jean, I'm going to pass this to you because it talks about AI-driven ATS handling, candidate screening, selection, scoring. You are in the midst of that journey. What Lena wants to understand more is, where does the recruiter's role evolve with AI coming through? And, since you're in the midst of that deployment, I thought I'll ask you on how you've rewired or rethought the role of the recruiter.
Yep. Actually, I feel that, Vikram, first of all, I feel a few folks have commented on this question. I feel Patricia specifically mentioned very, very good points, and I want to highlight that. I think essentially it's talking about how recruiters can use tools to create customized assessments, including voice recordings, Q&A, to gauge a candidate's experience beyond what's on paper. And I think so this part, I feel like to add on and supplement to what I said earlier, it's not just about recruitment. Is not just about CV screening. All right, it could be the entire journey and creating a pipeline. And similarly, recruitment is not just about the recruiter. It's about the hiring manager. It's about the team. And I think when you reduce the time on some of these things that can give you initial data, the recruiter and comes in to provide insights, to provide that gut feel and that why to the manager, to guide the manager on selecting the best talent. So I bring us back to the very first thing that, Vic, when you talk about in your research, right? You spoke to CEOs and you spoke to CHRO. Our main challenge of talent sourcing never changes, but now we're shifting, and I think we can do it better. All right, and I love that. Obviously, despite loving that, I'm a little bit scared that there's a lot to. It feels like a lot to change, right? It feels like a lot to adapt to. But I think the journey for HR is a very optimistic one, and especially for talent acquisition, the space is actually evolving very quickly. There are a lot of competing partners, and I'm on LinkedIn. I would have messages every few days on the tools and the demos that we can see. So I would say that recruiters will evolve to be stronger business partners. They will evolve to be the ones that can be more strategic in planning with the managers and we will be spending less time trying to figure out whether, okay, this CV is good or not. All right. And maybe even talking through how AI can prevent biases. I love to involve my team in building frameworks and making sure that we're doing the right thing. Yeah. That answers the question, Peter.
That's very helpful. And you said it right? It's not just about CV screening. There's much more to the role of a recruiter. Yes, of course, that's an important part, but that's a part which can increasingly go through that journey which Noel spoke to us about, right? That you'll have assistance, you'll have augmentation, and then that journey of automation and autonomy. Much as I would want to continue and keep going on with this interaction, there's so much I'm sure our attendees have learned. I, for one, will walk out much wiser after this panel. Just circling back, I'll just do a quick summary. Though I saw Keem used AI and has put out a full transcript of the panel. But I think, closing thoughts. First and foremost, thanks once again to our panelists, Saquon, Noel, and of course, Jean. My biggest takeaways from this is really about the fact that we are seeing change accelerate. As that change accelerates, we need to be ready to embrace it, to experiment with it. Noel, when you spoke about systemic, it is about experimentation, right? That experimentation should not be looked down upon. Experimentation is the way of life. And as you experiment, you then make it part of your day-to-day operating model, so to say. So I think that was a very big takeaway. Jean, your points around humanizing, your points around the fact that and the candor around excitement as well as anxiety. If you ask me, I think that's the right way to move ahead if you want to embrace changes. So part anxiety, more excitement is the right combination, because that anxiety also keeps you grounded. It brings in that element of questioning and having a framework in mind. So anxiety, more excitement, let me just say it, 80% excitement, 20% anxiety is the perfect mix for embracing change. And Saquon, the points which you made around how technology adaptation and adopting these technologies will become really important, because if you don't disrupt, somebody else is going to disrupt, I think are very pertinent points that I'll leave the attendees with. Once again, it's been an absolute privilege and a pleasure to host this panel. Thank you so much.